All right, welcome back, everyone. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I think both Harriet and I both are just coming back in town. How was your weekend and your travels this past weekend?
It was good. I had to go to Louisiana for a family wedding. So it was good to see family and see people who I probably have not seen in even beyond the pandemic. I saw some folks I ain't seen in 5 years. So it was good to be with family.
Okay, okay, nice, nice, nice. Now, were you there for a wedding?
Yeah, one of my cousins got married to a girl from Baton Rouge. And so it brought the family to Louisiana in the thick of Mardi Gras. Right? So, no, it was good. The wedding was lovely. He married a lovely woman. So it was good.
Okay, gotcha, gotcha. Now, I guess was the I guess was that kind of like the timing was intentional about having it during Mardi
They
Gras,
probably did,
or?
man. I got three of my closest friends are from Louisiana, and so Mardi Gras is like is a big deal down there. So I'm sure it was intentional to do it
Mhm.
during that time period, so you could be down there to party, whatever. Yeah,
Gotcha,
and then not
gotcha.
even just party. They do the parades. It's really festive. I don't know if you ever been to Louisiana doing Mardi Gras, but it's a festive time.
Okay, okay, nice, nice, nice. Well, I'm glad that that went well. I saw the from the Facebook, your nephew really enjoyed his, I guess, his trip down there.
They did, yeah. So I went with my brother and his three children, and they are good kids, spoiled. I participated in a lot of that, entitled, privileged, but great children. No, we had a good time. We had a really good time.
Okay, awesome, awesome. That is good to hear. That is good to hear. I know. How was the weather there?
Cold. It was
Really?
cold. And like when I left South Carolina, Thursday in South Carolina, it was 86.
Okay.
So the wedding was Friday in Baton Rouge, and the reception was outdoors, man, and it was 40 degrees, and I was freezing. And they had heat lamps, fire lamps, but I was literally freezing. And you did not. It was a fluke. It should not be cold in February in Louisiana, but it was. And
Okay.
40 degrees is not the coldest, but when you came from 86, that 46
Yeah.
degrees felt like whoa. It's really. I was not prepared. I did not have warm clothes, and I got the sniffles right now. So we're gonna work through that on Zycam and zinc and keep it moving.
No,
I was not prepared.
I completely understand. I know I was in New York this past weekend and was up there visiting was doing some filming for one of the episodes for my show with a software company from Europe, and so New York was a common place that we could meet up. So we met in New York, and then also I was up there seeing some clients, and yeah, I was just like, yeah, this 30, 35, 40 degree weather. I was like, I need to get back to the Carolinas.
Came from warm Carolina weather as well, so you did not expect those drastic cold temps. But at least you was
No.
prepared. I saw your photos. Like you had on a pea coat. You was dressed. I had a light jacket, bro. Cute thing to wear to the wedding. It was. I was cold.
Well, I am glad you are back. Yeah, so I'm glad you are back.
Thanks, man. It's good to be back. I had a lot of work to do, and so it's hard to work with children. And so I work in the middle of the night anyway. I'm the type. My staff will tell you they get emails from me starting at 3:34 in the morning because I'll get up when Jeffrey's asleep and work. And so I try to do that with kids, but my niece, my 4-year-old niece, slept with me, and so she saw my iPad, like my computer light on in the middle of the night. She would wake up and be like, "Put that down," or she would get her iPad. She think it's time to play. So I'm dealing with Bluey sounds, so I'm trying to think, and all these other cartoons. So yeah, it's different. Shout out to everybody who got to work with kids. God bless y'all. Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna be burning midnight hour for the next 6 days. Okay, midnight oil.
I I completely understand. I completely understand that. Well, today I wanted to I know we've been doing the board of directors series where we've been talking to responsibilities of the board, and we last week we said we were going to do kind of the managing performance, but there have been some questions that came up that people had about audits that I think is probably worth it for us to deviate from doing the managing performance to discuss kind of audits and really I think of just what an audit is, the different types of audits, because I think sometimes when people think about an audit, they only think about an IRS audit.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't, understand that there are other types of audits that a church can and should be doing.
Absolutely.
And then kind of what's involved in those audits, and then what can they do on a regular basis to stay audit ready.
Yeah.
So I think I want to start off with just kind of from your perspective, if someone were asking like, what is a church audit? Like, how would you define that?
Sure, I'm glad you asked me because Terrell's a finance guy, so he's going to give you all the technical. But I'm a layman's person, and I get clients that ask me all the time, "What's an audit? Why should I do it?" They automatically think that audit is a negative term, but it's really not. I think that an audit is fiscally responsible. So if I had to say, what's audit? It's not a symbol of distrust or someone's doing something wrong, but I think an audit is a mark of responsibility, right? An audit is demonstrating good stewardship in plain sight for everybody to see, right? And so, an audit is an assessment of your church's financial situations, right? To make sure you're doing a couple of things, right? To It's protecting persons of the local church. So, if we have policies and procedures in place, responsibility of who should do what, then nothing. There should be no carelessness or improper handling of money if we are following the procedures that we have set in place. And hey, let's not just take our word for it, the folks who count the money and handle the money, but let's let a third party neutral person come in and audit our systems to say, hey, you are doing it well, or here are some areas of improvement, right? I think audits build trust and support for financial persons. I know that when I'm a part of an organization or a group and they start presenting me numbers from accounting firms of audits, and it seems fiscally responsible, I'm probably going to continue giving here or increase my giving here because they are
Yeah.
financially accountable. I love transparency. And so, like I said, audits aren't necessarily a negative thing. Most times they are a great thing, right? Because any smart person with their money, we're going to take an assessment to say, are we doing the right things? Are our procedures of handling monies in compliance with the IRS, the law, what God would require of us? So I went on a whole tangent, but I think an audit is an excellent thing. I've called Terrell in to do forensic audits of matters on my own of organizations I've been a part of, because you need to have financial accountability and responsibility. And if nothing is being swept under the rug, then an audit should always be welcomed, right? Because
Yeah.
it'll show you what you don't know or what you need to know, or say, hey, good job, this is working for you. Anytime someone doesn't want to have an audit, I immediately, in my legal mind, red flag. Because even if we don't know everything that we're doing, right? You should want somebody to come in and tell you, hey, this is good, this is not good. And I personally believe it looks a whole lot better if the IRS comes knocking if you've started the process of an audit on your own accord, right? Than them forcing you to do one. So
Yeah.
I gave you a whole lot there, but that's kind of how I see it from a layman's perspective. Okay.
But no, I think that is a really good point, because one of the interesting things that is happening a lot more, even in the world of like some of your major accounting firms. Like coming out of college, I started off working for one of the, the big four, one of the four largest accounting firms in the world. And that's
Mhm.
where I started my career. And a lot of the things we were doing then is, really testing auditing procedures as it relates to financial transactions. But something that's happened more and more is there are more I guess you say, procedures and policies that aren't directly tied to finance, but that are also being included in some of those audits. Because when you start thinking about, like your processes in general, that there is some type of indirect financial implication to it, to where there are a lot of non-finance related procedures that are also being, reviewed in an audit as well. Because, one of those areas that I think that, that I would say for a church to be aware of is, to what you said, is it's really making sure that you have healthy processes and procedures in place, not only just so you can, confirm that, hey, we're doing what the policy says. Of There may be areas where the policies need to be updated. Like one in particular would be around, like, when it comes down to your member, their privacy and data security. So if people are giving, let's say, on an app, or they're giving some electronic way, their credit card or their bank information, there needs to be certain levels of security and protection about, hey, let's audit who in the church has access to that type of information, because these are your members, their personal bank accounts or their credit card information, and type different things like that are starting to become more and more a part of an audit. Because as an organization, I do think that is it is in the organization's best interest to be able to present like, hey, we have effective processes and procedures to make sure that the financial information is transparent, as well as making sure that we are protecting the private information of our people. And then I think you also get into some areas where there's some organizations that are starting to do like security audits of, hey, who has access to this part of the facility. I mean, when
Right.
you start getting into bigger churches and stuff, to where I think the term audit, I agree with you, it has been seen as a bad thing. But I do think that there is a perspective on audits, so where, hey, this is in our best interest and the best interest of our people if we do have audits in place.
An audit is a check. It's a system of checks and balances, y'all. It's checks and balances and make sure that you are operating as you should. And that can apply across any category. And I like that you said upgrades, because sometimes we can't run a church in 2022 like how we ran it in 1975. The
Yeah.
world has changed, and we need to grow with it if you want your ministry to keep growing.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and I think about, like, for a lot of churches, because a lot of churches are using things like text to give, or they're doing online giving. One of the areas that I always ask churches where it's like, this may not necessarily seem like it is a direct, you know, financial implication, but one of the things that we have to ask ourselves is like, hey, what layers of protection do you have around your members' information? Like, because no, I mean, we've all gotten those emails from a major bank where, hey, this major bank has been hacked, to where it's like, hey, do you have a process for sending out alerts to letting people know if there is a security breach? Are you going to let them know? Or do you just kind of hope they don't find out? Because I mean, there are some organizations that I've seen do that, to where there was a security breach and they didn't say anything. And
Oh, well.
then there was like a local news channel that got a hold of it and
Mhm.
they put the information out. That organization lost all credibility.
Right.
So now when it comes down to some of the legal aspects of it, I mean, do you usually do or recommend for churches to have like a audit of their policies and procedures
All
as it
the time.
relates to like legal issues?
All the time. When a church calls me in to work with them, the first thing I conduct is an audit of their standard operating procedures and policies, because I need to see, what have you been doing? What do you have listed? Are you complying with what you have listed? Is what you've had necessary for what you need moving forward? That's the first thing I do. I come in and I say, and some churches say they'll have it, it'll be old. Some churches don't have it. They need to help. They need me to help create it for them. But I do audit all policies and procedures. Give me your bylaws, your corporate governance documents, your standard operating procedures, your code of contacts. Give me all of that, right? The people that you have on salary, give me their contracts. Let me see where you guys are with your paperwork, or where you need to be. Yeah, that's one of the first things I do.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, and I think that that one becomes one that you don't really hear a lot of people talk about when it comes down to audit. So, from the number of churches that you encounter, like, what percentage of churches do you think are aware that, hey, we probably should have a legal audit done to make sure that, hey, we have what we need or we're squared away in those areas? What percentage of churches do you think actually are aware that, hey, a legal audit is needed?
So I'll say this, and I think I've said this on our series before. The churches that are denominational churches, your United Methodist churches who they follow the discipline, your Baptist churches, your AME, your AME Zion, there is typically more structured there because they're getting it passed down. Even if it's a small local church, their denomination has rules in place at the top. and they're passing it down. So they have to comply with that. They have to give reports. There are rules set in place that have been established for hundreds of years. Where I see the issue a lot of times that the church is not having it is the non-denominational churches who started their own thing, right? And so now we're led by God and we're making our own rules. And they might have gotten a blueprint from another non-denominational church, but you don't know if it was right or not, or it might have been old then. And so that's where I see. So what's the percentage? I can't give you a number, but I can draw the line on where I see it needs help. I see it. It's present in the denominational churches because they're following a script that's been around for hundreds of years. It's often not always present in the non-denominational churches because you're starting a ministry from scratch and you're going by what the Holy Spirit drops in your mind. And a lot of times the Holy Spirit will tell you, start the church, found the church, and prayerfully he's connecting you with people like me and Terrell to get your legal and financial stuff straight. But a lot of churches don't do that, and they do their own thing, and that's where I see an issue.
Gotcha. I would say I've probably seen the same as far as churches that are part of a denomination or part of an existing structure.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to be a little bit more proactive about these things being in play. And a lot of times it's not because they know it needs to be done, it's because they're being told, hey, you need to do
It's
this.
reinforced, right?
Mhm.
Like I grew up United Methodist. We have annual conference. You have to come. You have to give these reports. You have to give an account of your finances. You have to pay these apportionments. You have to follow these rules. And if somebody in the church bucks the system, they call in the district superintendent on you, who might be calling the bishop. It's a process that's been in place. But if you knew, you don't have all of that. And you could be a congregation of, say an apostle has 10 or 11 churches under him. We're starting a new movement and we're bringing churches in. That's really important. If you have a fellowship of churches, to have these rules and stuff in place. And it's okay to start your own thing. You just need to do it the correct way. And if the pastor and his team don't know how to do it, then this is where you hire and consult experts to help you do it right. Because at the end of the day, your mission is to get people closer to God and bring kingdom to the world. And you want to be set up so that nothing that you're doing will hinder the purpose God placed this ministry on your heart. So you need to be set up the right way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things that we'll try to do is, again, as we've said, if you watched any of the episodes, please do not take what we are saying as direct legal or financial advice.
Please don't.
One of the things that I tell people all the time, especially like lately, I've been doing teaching some classes on to business owners on taxes and telling them that, hey, what you hear me say isn't, hey, you need to go do exactly what I just said, because that's why I think having someone who knows your specific situation that can tailor the advice that's being given to your specific situation,
Mm-hmm.
because there are some exceptions, there are some general rules and general guidelines. So one
Right.
of the things we'll try to do is we'll try to put in the Facebook group some, like, maybe we'll put together like a document of a, here are some general things to keep in mind as it relates to audits and your church staying prepared. Because I do think from talking to a lot of ministers that and different churches, I think there are some things that they're not thinking about. And even as you mentioned about like different fellowships, I'm
Mm-hmm.
starting to see an increase in the number of, like, I guess of new fellowships that are starting. And sometimes as new fellowships, like you said, they don't have that skill set,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not something that they think about. Like something you mentioned last week that we were talking about, like with the personnel, like doing background checks on people, to
Mm-hmm.
where something that I've had to remind a church before is like, we need to make sure that we're doing like some type of regular audit on like the personnel files, making sure that you have everything that you need. Like, I mean, especially from a payroll standpoint, it's like, hey, did we get all the W-4s? Or if they're contractors, did we get W-9s? Like making sure that's part of the regular process, even on the background checks of like, hey, are we updating this? Because if, as you said, if
Things
you have
can
somebody
change.
working with kids,
Yeah, things
like,
can change.
we need to know if something has changed in this person's legal situations.
And you should, let me touch on that. You should have policies that require reporting if someone on your staff or volunteers has an infraction come up. But everyone's not always honest. So if not annually, maybe by every couple of years, you need to do an updated background check if they're still volunteering. Because why do you do that? If something happens at your church and your ministry, then you are able to show the court or whoever it is who's bringing claims against you, insurance company, we had policies in place. We had procedures in place. They were not stagnant. We updated them as necessary. This one might have slipped through the crack because it was just in the window of time frame for reporting. But we were doing everything that we could. It helps mitigate your damages, right? And it's not just the payout. You don't want people hurt. So my biggest thing is you don't want children hurt or people hurt, but you need to make sure you're doing what you need to do as well.
Absolutely. I mean, because I think even from a financial standpoint, one of the things that that you probably see is like when a church is, under investigation for embezzlement, the immediate thing is that people tend to just look at, oh man, the pastor's stealing money and the pastor's taking these people's money. Well, when you really look at some of the FBI investigations and some of the indictments, many times the person who's being investigated is actually an employee or a secretary
It's
of
not
the
the
church.
pastor. It's not the pastor. It's the little old lady who you would least suspect who've been counting the money for 30 years. Okay. It's very rarely the pastor. Smart pastors insulate themselves and they have separation between themselves and direct contact with the funds. But it's very rarely the pastor. It's like you said, it's somebody on staff. It's their old deacon, right? Who you
Yeah.
would least expect, who slips himself $200-300 a service, or $4,000-5,000 a service. Or you got the people down at what's Osteen Church, Lakewood, who got money in the walls. How we got $500,000 in the wall? Who missed this? Right,
Yeah.
right. It
Mhm.
wasn't
Yeah.
Joel Osteen did not put the money in the walls, but
Mhm.
it's his name that's called when it comes up, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that happens because I was looking at some in preparing for this episode, I was looking at some and FBI investigations, and that was one of the things that I continued to see as a pattern where it was in the headline of the article, it would say such and such church under investigation for embezzlement. But then when you read a little bit further, you're like, oh, it was the secretary that was under investigation. And I think part of that comes into of having when you have a third party audit of the processes and the procedures, things like that start to come up to
Mm-hmm.
where you can identify because I mean, in a lot of churches, especially the smaller churches, you aren't going to have the luxury of having, let's say, a staff of, of 5 people who all, are checks and balances for one another. Oftentimes, you're going to have a much smaller team, and this person is going to have access to things to where there aren't other people on the team who are constantly checking and reviewing that work. And when you have a smaller team like that, I think that it is more critical for an organization to have an audit to review stuff like that so they can point out like, hey, your people may be doing the right thing, but you need to be aware that there is a weakness in your process and we need to have an additional check here. Like one of the things that I've had to update a couple churches on is like I know that based on looking at the numbers, nobody did anything wrong. But right now, you guys only require one signature for a check to be written. That is room for embezzlement to happen. And
Right.
I'm like, to protect the church and to protect that individual
Mm-hmm.
is let's go with 2 signers on these checks because you guys have a smaller team. Let's make sure that we have some checks and balances built in. And that came by doing a assessment of their processes.
Right. That's right.
Now, one of the things that I do think that you don't often hear included in the audit process that I think that churches should start to think about more of is kind of the one is I think on your technology. It's who has access to certain technology. Because I think as easy as it is to just create a username and a password for somebody, is churches should regularly review and assess who still has access to this system, and should all the people on the list, should they still have access to this system?
Right.
Because I think that a lot of churches aren't going back and reviewing that, to
Hmm.
where, it's not an issue. Well, let's say it doesn't feel like an issue until something happens.
Right. That's always
And,
the
and
case.
I, mhm.
That's always the case.
And I think even in another area that's becoming much more critical, I mean, because of, tragic incidents that have happened, like the church shooting in Charleston, to where security is definitely an area that needs to be audited. Like, if your church is at the point where you do have, let's say, like key cards or something like that, there needs to be an audit of who has access to certain parts of the building. I think the same thing with, even if your church doesn't, when it comes down to physical keys, there needs to be a review and understanding is who has a physical key to the church facility, or even to the church's asset, like the church's bus or the church's vehicles. Like, who has access to those things? That's something that should be reviewed and that should be audited. Now, Harriet, have you seen, I guess, different churches, like, as different, things like that, like when it comes down to physical access, have you seen churches have a good, consistent kind of audit review on who has access to certain things or who has access to certain parts of the building?
It's typically like you said. A lot of times, churches, the smaller and mid-sized churches, you don't think about it until something occurs. I Daniel 9 shooting that you shared down in Charleston gave a lot of churches, black churches, a wake up call. Because if we really are, whosoever will, let them come. Right? It was a Bible study. You walk in off the street. Well, my God, the church is a place for people who have issues. So come on in. But that changed some things. So since that time, I saw churches do something differently. A couple of summers ago in 2020, we upfitted my church at the time. We upfitted the doors with security passcodes. We got rid of the keys because people leave. You never get them back. There is this turnover, right? So what if sister so-and-so or brother so-and-so, who y'all don't deal with no more, left the church and they mad at the church and they come out here and get your stuff because you never took their access back. So we updated the church to outfitted it where there are key codes to get in, and different people, each person has a different key code. So now not only do we know who's coming in and out, you can pull it up on the system and see who put in that code. It was this particular person. Don't share your code with other people. We need to know who has access, who's coming in and out of here. And so I think churches are starting to think about it now, but a lot of times it depends on size and resources. Every church can't afford that, right? And so it becomes, what can you do if you're not financially there? So it's a list. This person has the keys. Maybe we check it annually, right? Is so and so still here? Or this is another one. So and so might have passed away. Did you get the key back from the family? Did we change the locks? Were duplicate keys made? These are real questions. I see the passing away more so than I see the I'm just out, I'm leaving here. And so we don't change anything. And you might be cool, but brother so and so grandson might run with a band of thieves, right? So if I got all the church's van keys, I'm gonna come out here and steal the catalytic converters because they're going for a lot of money right now. This is real life. I've seen this recently happen to somebody. So you have to think of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that I've seen a lot of churches, you know, transition to using like the keypads and the codes, because, it's starting to become a much, much, much more cost effective, thing to implement. Whereas before, I mean, it was only the mega churches that could afford to implement this system. But I think that they're coming out with, access technology that can be used at, more medium and smaller size churches. So I definitely think that's an area that you should definitely look into. And just to kind of recap, I mean, from an audit of security, and audit on, definitely on the technology of seeing who has access to your members' information. Because just because and also, is just because a person is on the staff does not mean that they need access to your members' personal information. Like I said, your members are trusting your church with their credit cards or their bank information. I mean, even if they're writing checks, most checks still have the routing number and the account number at the bottom. You need to make sure that your church has proper procedures and safeguards around protecting that type of information. And of course, the legal audit and making sure that your affairs are in order, that you have the right things and policies, procedures in place. And also with the financial audit of making sure that, hey, that you can affirm and say, hey, we have healthy processes and procedures, and we can be transparent about what's happening with the finances of the organization. And before we wrap up, Harry, was there anything else you wanted to share on this topic?
I'll just say this with the audit, because you asked me what's the percentage of churches I see who have some of these issues, and I say a lot of times it's the non-denominational. A lot of the churches who call me in, they use a service to start their churches called Start Church. It's an online service. You go in, you pay maybe $300 or $400, and they get you set up with they get you incorporated. They give you some cookie cutter bylaws, the EIN, all of that good stuff. And so a lot of churches are doing that, and they have some compliance and some reviews. And there's nothing wrong with getting started like that, but just make sure you have someone in your ministry, or you consult with someone who can tell you about, hey, your policies need to be this, and who can teach you about these audits. And hey, I know someone who we can call. And it doesn't have to be Terrell and Harriet, you know what I mean? But have these type of resources available to you, because an audit is a blessing. And if you can get it right on the front end, we don't care who comes in here. Jesus, who sees all the IRS, we're going to put your names on the paper. You can pass the test. And that's the goal, right? That is the goal. To not go to jail or hell, right? For stealing from the Lord. That's what we're trying to do. All right? That's my spiel.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, again, thank you all for tuning in. Again, subscribe to the Facebook group, Church Law and Finance. Also, tell your pastors, tell your ministers, church administrators, people who are looking at developing outreach ministries. This type of information is very, very helpful for you. And continue to submit your questions, and we will do our best to really work those into the conversation, provide you answers in the context that you need. So until next Monday, you guys be blessed, and we will talk soon.